Today, I'll be going head-to-head versus Chat GPT to see who can create a better login screen for Excel using the VBA coding language. This is a simple little feature that does not integrate with any existing code, applications, or the internet. With AI being so good nowadays, this should be no problem, right? I guess we'll see. So I'm going to do this from the perspective of someone that does not know how to code in VBA. So the first line, I have no VBA experience and need step-by-step instructions. I want all code you give me to work with no errors. I have an Excel workbook that I want to be secured. It currently doesn't have any VBA code, but I want to add some to do the following. So we're going to copy and paste this prompt into the AI and we will see what it gives us. All right, so as we can see here, it has answered our prompt and we are going to follow these instructions step by step. Step 1 is to set up our user form and the sheet to store our credentials. Create a hidden sheet to store your credentials. Let's name this sheet users. It doesn't say anything about adding headers, so I'm not going to put them. So we can't really copy that over without modifying it, so we'll just create our own. Now that we've created several of our own, we will continue. Create a user form is the second step. So the first one is to open the VBA editor. In the editor, click Insert User Form. Okay, so it wants me to add a couple text boxes, a couple buttons, a checkbox. But just like I said in my prompt here, I have no VBA experience and need step-by-step instructions. So it's already telling me to do something and assuming I know how to do it, even though this is a thing that someone with no VBA experience would not know how to do. So like I said, if you had no experience with VBA, you would not know how to do any of step 2 on your own. You would have to ask it more questions about how to do that. So that's already not good. I've already done everything it says to do in step 2. And one thing I notice is, as you can see on the user form, there are no labels for which one is your username and which one is your password. Obviously, it's intuitive that the top one is username and the bottom is password, but you would never see a user form that doesn't have those labels on it. Step 3 is to code the user form. Show hide password, add the following code to toggle the visibility of your password. Great. Where do I add it? It doesn't give me the instructions on where to put this. I know where to put it. We'll double click on the checkbox, which again is not in the instructions and not intuitive. Once we do that, we have to delete what VBA automatically gives us and replace it with the copied code. So the instructions are not very good. All right, so now we are implementing the bulk of the code, I assume. Create a module with the main logic. Go to the editor, right click on workbook and select insert module. This is where we'll put the code for handling login attempts. Add the following code to the module. We'll copy and paste. Link the code to the user form buttons. For the login button, in the user form's code window, double click the login button. See, that is a good example of the instructions it should have provided earlier. So double click on the login button to open the code and add the following. So we'll go to the user form, double click on the login button, and we will add this code. Another instruction it did not include is that we need to delete this part that it gives us, because if we don't and we just paste it here, there will be a problem. Or if we paste it here so they are separate, there will be a problem. So this needs to be removed. And every time you double click on an object on a user form, it automatically produces the beginning and end of a subroutine. It should know that, and it should know that you can't have two of them in existence at the same time. For the admin button, in the user form's code window, double click the admin button, open the code, and add the following. Same critique here. This needs to be deleted. You now have a workbook with a secure login form that meets all of your requirements.
You sure about that?
So we put in our prompt, we followed the instructions, we saved our workbook, and we are going to test the results. We will double click. And would you look at that? What a surprise. It's on my other screen, but we have a compile error, variable not defined. So I'm going to acknowledge that so I can move the window over and show you. In this subroutine, we have a variable not defined, which is login form, as we see here. Okay, so we're at step 2. This is where this error took place. In the instructions, it told us to insert user form and then told us to add everything to the user form. But what it didn't tell us is to rename the user form object, which is user form 1, which is the default from VBA, which it should have used. But instead it used its own name for loginform.show, but never told us to update the name to login form. So this is why we hit a compile error. I fixed the first compile error, and we will open up again. Okay, so now we see we have our workbook open in the background, which we asked it not to do, so it failed. And our user form did pop up. That's good. Let's try a few things. We'll just hit the X. And let's see if we now have access. We have full read and write access to the workbook by just closing the login form. It's kind of pathetic, but it's not surprising to me. Let's do a couple more tests to see what happens. So we open up the workbook. It shows us the user form. Let's just hit login. And we have another compile error right here for I. So I is not defined. This is erroring because we have option explicit at the top of our VBA code, which means every single variable must be defined, including ones we use in for loops. I fixed the second compile error. We will open it again. We'll hit login. Invalid attempts. Attempt 1 of 3. That's an interesting message. We'll hit username. And we'll just leave password blank. Okay, let's hit the admin button. Enter admin password. We told it we wanted this to be admin with a capital A. Admin access granted. The show password toggle on and off does work. We're going to test the max number of login attempts feature to see if that works. So we will log in. 1, 2, 3. You have reached the maximum number of login attempts. Okay, so what should happen is that when we acknowledge this message, Excel should close. And as you can see, the window closed, but the application of Excel is still open. Here's something interesting I found is that for the for loop to check if username and password match what was entered, it does start on row 2 to the last row, which means it is taking into account headers, even though it did not tell us to add headers, and the example it gave us when adding our password started in A1. So our first user was an A1 and B1, which headers typically would be there. But in our example, our user's credentials were there and there was no instructions to add headers. Now in our code, it is not looking in that first row. So if my credentials were in the first row, I would never be able to log in because it's never searching in that location. It wants us to add our additional code here to unlock the workbook, even though it never locked the workbook to begin with, and we don't know how to code in VBA like we told it, but it's telling us to add our additional code here. So Chat GPT, in all of its infinite wisdom, has failed on 4 separate parts of our prompt and has provided us with code that is not secure and doesn't even work without someone who knows what they're doing having to fix it for them. I said this at the beginning of the video, but this is pathetic. This is a very simple, self-contained feature, and it struggles just to do simple things. So if you're relying on this for complex problems related to code, integrating its code with existing code, or connecting its code to other things, you are probably going to run into a lot more errors. This is a small project, and if I didn't know what I was doing, this would be completely useless without giving it 2, 3, 4, who knows how many more prompts to fix all of its own errors, even though I told it I don't have any experience and I want this to be written with no errors. If you need a feature like this built, or you want help learning how to build features like this in Excel VBA, reach out to me on my website. You can use this as we saw here, but it's not going to work, and it doesn't take into consideration a lot of the things that someone that has experience with the application does take into consideration. Have a good day.